Okay, now this time we have a quotient rule, chain rule combination. So we've got the log of cosine squared t over the square root of sine t, and I'm a little bit trepidatious about where this is going to go because I haven't done it before. Okay, with the quotient rule, u is the expression on top, so u is going to be equal to the log of cosine squared t. Now that's a power on a trig function, so we know that we should write this as the log of cosine t squared. So u prime, the derivative of that, derivative of log is 1 over cosine 1 over cosine of t squared, and then you have to multiply by the derivative of cosine t squared, so it's going to be 2 times cosine t, and then you're going to multiply by the derivative of cosine t, which is negative sine t. Well, one of the cosines, that cosine will cancel with one of these, and so what we're left with is u prime is equal to, there's going to be a negative 2 sine t over cosine t, which is negative 2 tan t. So u prime is equal to negative 2 tan t. Now, that's not our final answer, but because there's so much work on this, we'll just ring fence it off. Now we want to look at v, and v is the square root of sine t, which we're going to write as sine t to the power of 1/2. We know by now that anytime you have square roots in calculus, we're going to replace the square root with the power of 1/2. So v prime, if I can get my pen to write in this part of the surface, v prime will multiply down by the power 1/2 of sine t to the power of minus 1/2, because you reduce the power by 1, and then multiply by the derivative of sine t, which is cosine t. And if we simplify that, we get v prime is equal to cosine t over 2 times the square root of sine t. Okay, now let's look at what we had originally. F of t was equal to the log of cosine squared t over root sine t. So now we're going to have to try and rewrite all of that. Okay, so it's going to be f prime of t is going to be, now it's a quotient rule, so it's v, which was the square root of sine t, times u prime, which is negative 2 tan t, minus u, which is the log of cosine squared t, by v prime, which is cosine of t over 2 times the square root of sine t. And on the bottom, we're going to have v squared. So that was the square root of sine t squared. Okay, so there are things that we can do with this, none of which are going to be pleasant, but for example, on the top line, we can get a common denominator. Okay, this is all over, the first piece here is all over 1. So our common denominator, if we look at the two terms on top, we've got a 1 and a 2 root sine t. So the common denominator is going to be 2 root sine t. So let's do that. And that's going to give you f prime of t is equal. Now if we multiply the top here, the numerator here, root sine t times minus 2 tan t by 2 root sine t, that's a mouthful, we're going to get 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Root sine t by root sine t is going to be sine t. And then we have the tan t. So it's going to be negative 4 sine t tan t minus the natural log of cosine squared t by cosine t. And remember, that's the common denominator is only for the top line, 2 times the square root of sine t. And on the bottom, we're dividing that by the square root of sine t squared, which is just going to be sine of t. Okay. Now, if we divide the expression on top, negative 4 sine t tan t minus log of cosine squared t cosine t over 2 root sine t, if we divide that by sine of t, in other words, we multiply everything on top by the reciprocal of sine t, which is 1 over sine t, we're going to get this expression here. F prime of t is equal to negative 4 sine t tan t minus the log of cosine squared t cosine t all over 2. Now it's going to be root sine t by sine t, which is, that's part of 1/2, that's part of 1. Add the powers, so 2 times the square root of sine t cubed, which we can write in a sort of more conventional, more classical style if you like. Negative 4 sine t tan t minus the log of cosine squared t times cosine t over 2 times the square root of sine cubed t. If you spot any mistakes in there, you please tell me, or don't tell me maybe, sorry for inflicting that one on you, but it's important that you see at this point how convoluted these things can get. Most of what you deal with won't be this complicated, but certainly they can get pretty tricky, and square roots and quotient rule problems tend to have that effect. Okay, good luck with it. Don't let that put you off, because they're not all going to be anything like as difficult as that. Most of the ones you see in the AP exam won't be just as long-winded as that. Nevertheless, I think it's a good idea that you see it now. Okay, thank you.